The people who call you a gold digger are usually the same people who never bothered to learn your story. Friday night dinners at the Holloway mansion always felt more like business meetings than family gatherings. The house sat on nearly 3 acres outside Dallas, surrounded by iron gates, perfectly trimmed hedges, and enough marble to make a luxury hotel jealous. Everything about it was designed to impress. Jasmine Carter never cared much about any of that. She arrived a few minutes before 7, carrying a homemade peach cobbler in both hands. It was something she had been bringing for years. Nobody ever asked her to. She just knew Derek liked it. A housekeeper opened the front door. "Good evening, Mrs. Holloway." Jasmine smiled. "Good evening, Linda." As she stepped inside, she could already hear laughter coming from the dining room. Most of the family had arrived. Derek was standing near the fireplace talking with his uncle and 2 company executives. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Hey." He walked over and kissed her on the cheek. "Long drive." "About 40 minutes. You should have let me pick you up." Jasmine laughed softly. "I survived." Before Derek could answer, another voice cut through the room. Of course she survived. She always knows exactly where she needs to be. Margaret Holloway appeared holding a wine glass. Her smile looked pleasant enough from a distance. Up close, it never quite reached her eyes. Jasmine had learned the difference years ago. "Good evening, Margaret." "Jasmine." The way she said her name somehow sounded like criticism. Dinner started 20 minutes later. Crystal glasses. Expensive china. The kind of meal people photographed before eating. Conversations moved from business deals to investments to vacation homes. Jasmine mostly listened. She always did. Then Margaret set down her fork and looked directly at her. That was usually a bad sign. "Tell me something, Jasmine." The table grew quieter. Derek shifted slightly in his chair. "What?" Jasmine asked politely. Margaret smiled. "What exactly attracted you to Derek in the beginning?" Several people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Jasmine already knew where this was going. "I liked him." Margaret laughed. "That is a very safe answer." Nobody said anything. Not even Derek. Margaret took a sip of wine. "I mean, let us be honest. My son was already successful, already wealthy, already running part of the company." Jasmine remained calm. And people talk." Margaret shrugged. "Some of them wonder if you saw an opportunity." A few nervous chuckles appeared around the table. Jasmine stared at her water glass for a second, then back at Margaret. People can wonder whatever they want. That answer seemed to annoy Margaret even more. "You never defend yourself." "I do not see the point. Or maybe there is nothing to defend." The room became painfully quiet. "I have always believed there is something revealing about people who try to embarrass others in public. Most of the time they tell you more about themselves than the person they are targeting." Derek finally cleared his throat. "Mom." "What?" Margaret said. "We are all family here." Jasmine looked toward Derek. For a second, she wondered if he would finally say something. Anything. But he stayed silent. That hurt more than Margaret's comments ever could. Margaret leaned back in her chair. "I am just saying some people spend years trying to belong somewhere they never truly fit." Jasmine slowly folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. Her face never changed. Her voice remained steady. "Maybe." Margaret smiled, believing she had won the exchange. What she did not realize was that Jasmine was not upset. She was thinking. Because earlier that afternoon, an unexpected envelope had arrived in her mailbox, and the name printed on the return address was one Margaret Holloway would never see coming. Jasmine waited until she got home before opening the envelope. Her apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. It was nearly 10 o'clock. She set her purse on the kitchen counter, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the cream-colored envelope for a moment. The return address alone was enough to make her heart beat faster. Harold Carter. Most people would not recognize the name. In certain business circles, it carried weight. A lot of weight. Jasmine carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The message was short. Very short. That was typical of Harold. "The time has come. Board meeting next Thursday. Attendance required. Do not decline this invitation." Jasmine read it twice. Then a third time. Tucked behind the letter was an old photograph. She smiled the second she saw it. The picture had been taken almost 20 years earlier. A younger Jasmine sat on the shoulders of an older man standing in front of a large office building. Both were laughing. She traced a finger across the edge of the photo. Some memories never really leave you. Meanwhile, back at the Holloway mansion, dinner was ending. Guests were gathering coats. Conversations drifted toward upcoming company events. Margaret appeared happier than usual. Derek noticed. You really did not need to go after Jasmine like that. Margaret looked genuinely surprised. Go after her? You know exactly what I mean. She shook her head. I was being honest. Derek sighed. You always say that. Because it is true. Margaret lowered her voice. You are too trusting. Derek leaned against the kitchen island. Mom, we have been married for 4 years. And I still do not know what she wants. Derek did not answer. The uncomfortable truth was that he had wondered the same thing before. Not because Jasmine had given him a reason. Mostly because Margaret never stopped planting doubts. Back at her apartment, Jasmine placed the photograph on the coffee table and sat quietly on the couch. Her phone buzzed. Derek. She considered ignoring it. Instead, she answered. Hey, you got home okay? I did. A brief silence followed. About tonight. Derek started. Jasmine already knew where the conversation was heading. It is fine. No, it is not. He rubbed his forehead on the other end of the call. She should not have said those things. Jasmine looked toward the photograph again. But she did. Derek exhaled slowly. You know she does not mean everything she says. Jasmine almost laughed. Derek, your mother means exactly what she says. He had no response to that. Another silence settled between them. Finally he asked, Are you doing anything next Thursday? Jasmine stared at the letter in her hand. Actually, yes. Work? Something important. Can I ask what? Jasmine looked out the window at the city lights. Not yet. After the call ended, she folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. For the first time in years, something was changing. She could feel it. And somewhere across town, Margaret Holloway was already making plans for the biggest company celebration of the year, completely unaware that the one person she looked down on most had just received an invitation that could change everything. The following week moved quickly. Too quickly for Derek. Every time he called Jasmine, she seemed distracted. Not distant. Just focused on something she refused to explain. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. By Wednesday afternoon, the entire Holloway company was preparing for its annual leadership celebration. It was the biggest corporate event of the year. Investors would attend. Executives would attend. Local media would be there. Margaret treated it like a royal ceremony. She walked through the company headquarters, inspecting every detail herself. Flower arrangements, seating charts, lighting. Nothing escaped her attention. Move those banners higher, she instructed one employee. And make sure the family table stays near the stage. She paused and looked toward Derek. Did Jasmine confirm? Derek glanced up from his phone. Confirm what? Margaret frowned. The event. I assume she is coming. You assume too much. She straightened a decorative centerpiece. People like Jasmine know opportunities when they see them. Derek felt irritation building. Mom. What? Can we go one day without doing this? Margaret raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Acting like she married me for a business advantage. Margaret laughed softly. Derek, open your eyes. The girl came from nowhere. Across town, Jasmine was sitting in a quiet conference room inside a private law office. A gray-haired attorney placed several folders on the table. Everything has been finalized. Jasmine nodded. And Harold, he will be there tomorrow. She looked down at the documents. Her expression remained calm, but inside she felt something she had not felt in years. Anticipation. Not fear. Not anxiety. Just the feeling that a chapter of her life was finally reaching its end. The attorney smiled. You know, most people would have revealed all of this a long time ago. Jasmine laughed quietly. Most people are smarter than me. I doubt that. Later that evening, Derek arrived at their apartment carrying takeout from Jasmine's favorite restaurant. He found her sitting on the balcony watching the city lights. I brought dinner. She smiled. You remembered. I occasionally have good ideas. That earned a small laugh. They ate together while the sun disappeared behind the skyline. For a while, everything felt normal again. Then Derek finally asked the question that had been bothering him all week. What happens tomorrow? Jasmine looked at him. Really looked at him. Do you trust me? Derek answered immediately. Of course. Then wait one more day. He studied her face. There was something different there. Confidence. Certainty. Like someone carrying a secret that was finally becoming too heavy to hide. Is this about that letter? He asked. Jasmine smiled but did not answer. The silence told him enough. The next morning, luxury vehicles began arriving outside the downtown convention center where the Holloway celebration was being held. Investors stepped onto red carpets. Reporters gathered near the entrance. Inside, Margaret stood proudly greeting guests as if she already owned the future. What she did not know was that less than 2 miles away, another meeting was about to begin. A meeting involving names, signatures, and documents that would change everything she believed about Jasmine Carter. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies over Dallas. Traffic crawled through downtown streets as executives, investors, and board members headed toward meetings that would shape the next year of business. Inside a private conference center several blocks away from the Holloway celebration, Jasmine stepped out of an elevator and entered a quiet hallway lined with dark wood panels and floor-to-ceiling windows. She wore a tailored navy suit and carried a single leather folder. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress. That was never her style. A receptionist immediately stood when she saw her. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Jasmine smiled politely. "Good morning." The woman handed her a visitor badge, though both of them knew she would not need it much longer. At the end of the hallway, 2 attorneys were already waiting. One of them opened the conference room door. "They are ready for you." Jasmine nodded and stepped inside. Around the table sat several men and women she had known most of her life. Some smiled warmly when they saw her. Others simply nodded. Then her eyes found Harold Carter. The older man stood near the window overlooking the city. His silver hair had become thinner over the years, but his presence still filled every room he entered. "You made it," he said. Jasmine laughed softly. "You did not leave much room for excuses." Harold smiled. "I learned that from your grandmother." Across town, the Holloway celebration was already underway. Cameras flashed. Guests filled the ballroom. Margaret moved confidently from group to group, accepting compliments and shaking hands. She looked completely at home. Derek stood beside her, though his attention kept drifting toward his phone. "Still waiting for Jasmine?" Margaret asked. "She said she had something important this morning." Margaret rolled her eyes. "More important than this?" Derek did not answer. Deep down, he was beginning to realize there were entire parts of Jasmine's life he knew almost nothing about. Back in the conference room, folders were distributed around the table. Harold remained standing. "Before we begin," he said, "there are a few matters that need to be addressed." The room became quiet. Jasmine felt every eye shift toward her. One board member smiled. "It is about time." Harold nodded. "I agree." He placed a hand on the back of a chair and looked directly at Jasmine. "For years, certain decisions were delayed because I requested they be delayed. Certain announcements were postponed because I requested they be postponed. Today, those delays end." Jasmine remained calm, but her pulse quickened, not from fear, from knowing that after today, nothing would be the same. Harold opened a folder and removed several documents. "Legal counsel has completed the final review." One attorney nodded. "Everything is ready." Harold looked around the room one last time. "Good." Then he turned toward Jasmine. "You have waited long enough." At almost the exact same moment, inside the packed ballroom across town, Margaret stepped onto the stage to begin her keynote speech, completely unaware that less than 10 minutes from her location, a decision was being finalized that would soon challenge everything she believed about power, wealth, and the woman she had spent years underestimating. The conference room remained silent for several seconds after Harold finished speaking. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody checked a phone. Even the attorneys seemed unusually focused. Harold was the kind of man who commanded attention without raising his voice. He slid a document across the table toward Jasmine. "Take a look." Jasmine opened the folder carefully. The first few pages contained legal language. Ownership structures, trust agreements, transfer provisions. The kind of paperwork most people never read twice. Then she reached the final page. Her eyes stopped moving. Harold watched her reaction. "Everything is exactly as your grandmother wanted." Jasmine looked up. "You finalized it?" One of the attorneys nodded. 3 weeks ago. Another attorney added. "The board approved every recommendation unanimously." Across the table, several board members smiled. One of them leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, we have been waiting years for this day." Jasmine laughed softly. "You make it sound dramatic." "It is dramatic," another member replied. "You just do not realize it yet." Meanwhile, across town, Margaret stood under bright stage lights addressing hundreds of guests. The ballroom was packed. Investors filled the front tables. Reporters lined the back wall. Company executives moved between conversations. Margaret smiled as she spoke about growth, leadership, and the future. The Holloway family has spent decades building something extraordinary. Applause followed. Derek sat near the front. He clapped. Politely, but his attention was elsewhere. He checked his phone again. No messages from Jasmine. That bothered him more than he expected. Back in the conference room, one attorney connected a laptop to a large screen. Several files appeared. Financial reports, corporate structures, ownership records. Harold stood and walked toward the display. For years, people assumed control belonged to a handful of visible names. He glanced toward Jasmine. That assumption was useful. Jasmine folded her arms. Useful for who? Harold smiled. For you. The screen changed. A chart appeared. Several companies connected through trusts, holding groups, and investment entities. Even after all these years, the scale surprised Jasmine. One board member pointed toward the screen. Most people only know the public side of the business. Another nodded. They never see the foundation underneath. Harold picked up a remote. And today they will. With one click, another document appeared. This one carried official signatures and legal certifications. The attorneys immediately began distributing copies around the room. Jasmine accepted hers without speaking. Her pulse quickened slightly as she read. Not because she was shocked. Because she finally understood why Harold insisted she attend personally. Across town, Margaret stepped down from the stage to another round of applause. Several investors approached to congratulate her. One of them smiled. You must be very excited about today's announcement. Margaret looked confused. Announcement? The investor blinked. You have not heard. Before he could explain further, his phone buzzed. Then another phone buzzed nearby. Then another. Within seconds, people across the ballroom were checking incoming messages. Confused expressions began appearing throughout the room. Derek pulled out his phone at the same moment. A company-wide notification had just arrived. The subject line contained only 4 words. Emergency board communication. And for the first time all morning, the celebration inside the ballroom began to fade. The ballroom grew noticeably quieter as people opened the notification. Conversations stopped in the middle of sentences. A few executives stepped away from their tables to read more carefully. Derek frowned as he scanned the message on his phone. It was brief, but impossible to ignore. An emergency corporate announcement would be released within the hour. Attendance was mandatory for all senior leadership. What is going on? One investor asked. Nobody seemed to have an answer. Across the room, Margaret was already irritated. She walked toward the nearest executive. Who approved this? The man looked uncomfortable. I'm not sure. Then find out. Margaret folded her arms. She hated surprises, especially public ones. Several miles away, inside the conference room, Harold remained standing while the attorneys finalized the last documents. Jasmine sat quietly, reading every page. The room felt different now. Lighter somehow. Like years of waiting were finally reaching their conclusion. Harold looked toward her. Any questions? Jasmine smiled. Only one. Go ahead. Why wait this long? A few board members exchanged knowing looks. Harold laughed softly. Because timing matters. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. That sounds mysterious. Maybe. Harold walked toward the window overlooking downtown Dallas. Your grandmother believed that character reveals itself over time. She wanted people to show you who they were before they learned who you were. Jasmine looked down at the documents again. Suddenly a lot of things made sense. The comments. The assumptions. The years of being underestimated. Harold continued. Money changes how people behave. Titles change how people behave. She wanted you to see the difference. Back at the ballroom, Derek's phone vibrated again. This time an email arrived with an attachment. He opened it immediately. His eyes moved across the screen, then stopped. He read the first page again, then a third time. That cannot be right. Margaret noticed the expression on his face. What is it? Derek looked up slowly. I think you need to read this. She took the phone from his hand. At first her expression remained confident. Then confusion appeared. Then disbelief. The document listed ownership structures tied to several parent companies connected to businesses throughout Texas and beyond. Real estate, logistics, manufacturing, investment holdings. The numbers alone were staggering, but one detail stood out above everything else. A name, Jasmine Carter. Margaret stared at the screen. No. Derek did not respond. This has to be some mistake. Her voice sounded smaller now, less certain. Around them, more phones continued buzzing. More executives were reading the same information. the room filled with whispers. Meanwhile, in the conference room, one attorney finally slid the last folder toward Jasmine. Congratulations. Another smiled. Everything is official. Jasmine exhaled slowly. Not because she felt powerful. Not because she felt victorious. Mostly because a burden she had carried for years was finally gone. Harold nodded toward the documents. You own the future of this company now. Jasmine looked at him, then at the board members around the table, then back at the papers. Before she could respond, her phone lit up. The caller ID showed Derek Holloway. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen while the room remained silent around her. Jasmine let the phone ring twice before answering. Hello. On the other end, Derek sounded completely different than he had a few hours earlier. Gone was the casual confidence. Gone was the certainty. Jasmine. A pause followed. Is it true? She already knew what he meant. What part? Derek exhaled slowly. The documents. The ownership records. The announcement. Jasmine glanced around the conference room. Several board members were politely giving her space. Harold stood near the window, pretending not to listen. Yes, she said. It is true. Silence. For a moment, she wondered if the call had dropped. Then Derek spoke again. Why did you never tell me? Jasmine leaned back in her chair. She had expected the question. Because you never asked. Across town, Derek sat alone at a table near the back of the ballroom, while chaos quietly unfolded around him. Executives were whispering. Investors were making calls. Margaret was demanding answers from anyone willing to listen. That is not fair, Derek said softly. Jasmine looked out the window at the Dallas skyline. Maybe not, but it is honest. Another long silence settled between them. Finally, Derek spoke. Can we meet? Jasmine thought about it for a second. Not today. She ended the call before either of them could say anything else. Back in the ballroom, Margaret marched toward Derek with a printed copy of the announcement in her hand. Tell me this is wrong. Derek looked at the pages. It is not. Impossible. Apparently not. Margaret lowered her voice. That girl cannot own those companies. Derek looked directly at his mother. Her name is Jasmine. Margaret ignored the correction. There has to be some explanation. Before Derek could answer, a new voice interrupted them. There is. Both turned around. Standing a few feet away was one of the senior investors. A man Margaret had spent years trying to impress. He adjusted his glasses and nodded toward the document. The Carter family has been involved in these businesses for decades. Margaret stared at him. You knew? A lot of people knew. Then why did nobody say anything? The investor smiled slightly. Because it was not our story to tell. That answer hit harder than Margaret expected. Meanwhile, back at the conference center, the formal meeting had finally ended. Board members shook Jasmine's hand one by one before leaving. Several offered congratulations. Others welcomed her into her new role. Through it all, Jasmine remained exactly the same. Calm, polite, grounded. Harold watched with quiet satisfaction. You know, he said after the room emptied. Your grandmother would have enjoyed today. Jasmine laughed softly. She probably would have told me not to take it too seriously. That sounds like her. Harold smiled. Then his expression became more thoughtful. Are you angry? Jasmine considered the question carefully. Surprisingly, the answer came easily. No. Harold nodded. Good. I am disappointed in some people. She looked toward the city outside. But I am not angry. Across Dallas, Margaret sat alone in a quiet corner of the ballroom, watching people discuss Jasmine Carter with admiration she had never expected to hear. And for the first time in years, she found herself asking a question. She should have asked from the beginning. Not what Jasmine wanted from the family, but who Jasmine really was. 3 days passed before Derek saw Jasmine again. Not at home. Not at a family dinner. Not by accident. He requested a meeting through her office, and to his surprise, she agreed. Late Monday afternoon, he stepped into a conference room overlooking downtown Dallas. The city stretched for miles beyond the glass walls. Everything felt polished, organized, professional, a reflection of the woman he was finally beginning to understand. Jasmine entered carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee. She smiled politely. Thank you for waiting. Derek stood. Thank you for agreeing to meet. For a moment, neither knew what to say. The silence was not hostile, just unfamiliar. Jasmine took a seat across from him. So what did you want to talk about? Derek laughed softly. Honestly, I am not even sure where to start. Jasmine nodded. That is fair. He looked down at his hands. I keep replaying the last few years in my head. And And I keep noticing things I should have noticed back then. Jasmine remained quiet. Derek continued. The way you never cared about expensive things. The way you avoided talking about money. The way you never tried to impress anyone. He shook his head. Most people would have mentioned something. Jasmine smiled faintly. Probably. Why did you not? She looked out the window for a second before answering. Because I liked knowing who people were when they thought I had nothing to offer. Derek absorbed that in silence. The answer felt simple, yet it explained so much. My mother was wrong about you. Jasmine looked back at him. Your mother was wrong about a lot of things. Derek could not even argue. Back at the Holloway house, Margaret sat alone in the library reading article after article about the Carter family. The more she learned, the worse she felt. Photographs, interviews, business profiles, charity projects. Jasmine had never hidden because she was ashamed. She had hidden because she never felt the need to prove anything. Margaret closed the laptop slowly. For years she had judged someone she never truly knew. Meanwhile in the conference room, Derek leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you ever think about telling me? Jasmine considered the question carefully. A few times. What stopped you? She smiled sadly. Every time I thought about it, another comment happened. Another assumption. Another test. Derek lowered his eyes. He knew exactly what she meant. The hardest part was realizing she had endured all of it without ever trying to embarrass anyone in return. I am sorry, he said quietly. Jasmine studied him for a moment. She could tell he meant it. I know. That answer surprised him. You do? She nodded. You are many things, Derek. But you are not dishonest. Outside the window, the evening sun began dropping behind the skyline. The city glowed gold. For the first time in years, the conversation between them felt completely honest. No assumptions. No expectations. Just two people finally seeing each other clearly. And sometimes that clarity arrives long after it should have. The meeting ended shortly before sunset. Derek remained seated for a few seconds after Jasmine stood to leave. Neither of them rushed toward the door. Neither seemed eager to end the conversation completely. Some moments in life do not need dramatic endings. They just need honesty. Jasmine picked up her tablet and smiled. I should get going. Derek nodded. I know. She took a few steps toward the door before he spoke again. For what it is worth, I am glad I finally know the real you. Jasmine looked back at him. The real me was always there. Derek laughed softly. Yeah, I guess that is the problem. After she left, he sat alone watching the last light of day reflect across the glass buildings outside. For the first time in years, he stopped thinking about companies, ownership, or family expectations. Instead, he thought about ordinary moments. Coffee on Sunday mornings. Long drives with no destination. The homemade peach cobbler Jasmine always brought to family dinners. The things he had taken for granted because he assumed they would always be there. A few days later, Margaret asked Jasmine to meet her for lunch. It was the first invitation she had ever extended without an agenda. They sat at a small restaurant overlooking a lake on the edge of the city. For several minutes, neither woman spoke much. Finally, Margaret folded her hands and looked directly at her. I owe you an apology. Jasmine remained quiet. Margaret continued. Actually, I owe you several. Jasmine could hear the sincerity in her voice. That alone was surprising. You judged me before you knew me, Jasmine said gently. Margaret nodded. I did. Why? Margaret looked down at the table. Because it was easier than questioning my own assumptions. That answer earned a small smile from Jasmine. It was not a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. Sometimes that matters more. As the weeks passed, life settled into a new rhythm. Jasmine stepped into her leadership role with the same quiet confidence she had always carried. She did not change because of the title. She did not become louder. She did not suddenly start showing off her success. If anything, she remained exactly the same person she had always been. The only difference was that now people were finally paying attention. One evening, she stood in her office looking out over the Dallas skyline while the city lights flickered below. Her phone buzzed with a message from Derek. It was simple. No pressure. No grand speech. Just a few words. Thank you for giving me the chance to understand. Jasmine read the message and smiled. Then she placed the phone on her desk and returned to the work in front of her. Because some chapters are meant to be remembered, others are meant to be left behind. And maybe that is the lesson hidden inside stories like this. In everyday life, people are often judged by their job, their neighborhood, their clothes, or the assumptions others make about them. But none of those things reveal character. Character shows up in how people treat others when there is nothing to gain. It shows up in patience, kindness, humility, and integrity. Jasmine never needed wealth to prove her value. Her value existed long before anyone knew her story. The people who only saw what they wanted to see missed that completely. The people who took the time to truly understand her eventually discovered something much more important than success. They discovered who she really was.